Week 2 is upon us, and we have it kicking off tonight between the Green Bay Packers and the Washington Commanders. It's going to be a great game between two teams that have Super Bowl aspirations this year behind their talented rosters. Whether or not you are 1-0 or 0-1 in fantasy football, now is the time to take advantage and gain some momentum and play the right players in your lineup on a weekly basis. Whether that's a rookie about to break out, a veteran with a great matchup, or guys that you just need to lock into your lineups, I'm here with the best start and sit guide in the fantasy football community to help you win your week. Let's get right into this video here on Blitz Fantasy Football. What's going on, everybody? My name is Blitz Lincoln. Today we are talking about week 2 start and sit advice guide. Might as well just get right into it with our quarterbacks that I recommend starting this week. We go 3 starts, 3 sits for every position, and then we get 2 kickers and defense. We're going to start out in New York with Justin Fields. I mean, Justin had a monster performance last week, and he absolutely cashed in on my absolute love affair with him and him being a great pick late in drafts. 30 points in his debut with the New York Jets, 218 passing yards, a touchdown, and then he added 2 more scores on the ground as well. He's not going to score 2 touchdowns on the ground every single week, but his rushing upside gives him a really safe floor, and he also has a high ceiling if he's able to convert those rushing touchdowns on a weekly basis. We knew that the matchup last week was going to be tough against the Steelers with what they've done to limit Lamar Jackson over the years, and he still cashed in on it. The Bills really struggled against the Ravens and Lamar Jackson, allowing 40 points last week. Justin Fields and the Jets should be trailing for a majority of this game. Expect them to be in for a nice week this week against the Buffalo Bills. Justin Herbert is our next must-start quarterback here. Herbert had a breakout performance against the Kansas City Chiefs last week, throwing for 318 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Chargers revamped the receiver corps this offseason with Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston paired with Ladd McConkey out there at receiver. They also have Trey Harris and KLS, who are solid 4 and 5 receiving options for them. And then they have a good backfield of Amari and Hampton and Najee Harris to go pair with them. Since last season, since week 7 exactly, Justin Herbert has been passing more than expected compared to a lot of quarterbacks. They ranked 8th in the NFL in terms of passing volume over that stretch now. And it's safe to say the Chargers are turning into more of a pass first team with run second, despite Greg Roman being a historic run first type of guy. They get the Raiders this week where Drake Maye was able to throw for 287 yards despite really rough conditions in New England last week. Expect big things against a weak secondary. This Chargers team should get rolling for the second straight week. Drake Maye is actually our next must-start candidate. And yeah, he didn't really cash in last week with a good matchup, but I think this is the week he's going to do it. He threw 46 passes in that rain-filled game. Still, like I mentioned, finished with those 287 yards. He does have really good rushing upside, and he threw a touchdown last week as well. They get a matchup, though, against their division rival, the Miami Dolphins, who allowed a touchdown every single drive last week to the Daniel Jones-led Indianapolis Colts, where he finished with 272 yards and a massive day in the fantasy football box score. Expect Miami to be one of the worst defenses in the NFL this year, and Maye's rushing upside gives him a safe floor. I'm absolutely taking a gamble on him this week and putting him in my lineups because the upside is unreal against a really bad defense. The quarterbacks that I am willing to sit this week, it starts in Kansas City, and it's Patrick Mahomes. It's just really hard to trust Patrick Mahomes this week. I mean, it obviously depends on your situation, what quarterbacks are on waivers and quarterbacks you can play, but playing Patrick Mahomes this week comes with its risk. He did score 26 points last week without Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy against one of the best defenses in the NFL in the Los Angeles Chargers. But this week is not going to get any easier without Worthy and Rice, and he's playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who absolutely terrorized him in the Super Bowl behind a weak offensive line. The offensive line didn't necessarily grade out too well last week, according to PFF, and the running game was nowhere to be found. It is going to be basically Patrick Mahomes' superhero game, which could ultimately happen. But in fantasy football, it's really risky to play him just based on the weapons available at his disposal, the incredibly tough matchup, and the lack of a running game. All those combined together with Patrick Mahomes' struggles at times in fantasy football last season, I have a hard time playing him this week. But I think rest of the season, Patrick Mahomes is going to be in a great spot to be a really consistent fantasy option in the lineups. Trevor Lawrence is the next guy, and I had Trevor Lawrence as a start next week, and boy, I was wrong. Against the worst passing offense in the NFL, or passing defense, sorry, in the NFL last year in the Carolina Panthers, Lawrence finished 24 of 38 in his debut with Liam Cohen. 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and 178 yards. That does not scream taking advantage of an elite matchup. This week, The Jaguars get the Cincinnati Bengals, who is another elite matchup, but they did pressure quarterbacks at an above average rate in week 1, and they still have Trey Hendrickson on that defensive side of the ball. I just find it very hard that Trevor Lawrence, and he may even get a positive game script to where he's throwing a ton because the Jags are down, but I have a hard time finding Trevor Lawrence in my starting lineups. If he couldn't cash in on Carolina last week, I'm not starting him until he proves to me that he can put together consistent performances under Liam Cohen against good matchups. My last player is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud deserves to be nowhere near a starting lineup right now in fantasy football. Last week finished with 188 yards and no touchdowns with 1 interception while facing pressure on 40% of his dropbacks. Tampa Bay actually had a higher pressure rate than the Rams last week, so it's going to be a really tough matchup for that offensive line for the second straight week. So as long as Houston's offensive line continues to be a major liability, it's almost impossible to roll out Stroud in your starting lineups in fantasy football, considering the fact they also have no run game right now. It's incredibly risky. Let's get into our next position here, the running backs. Travis Etienne kicks off this list, and nobody's stock has gone up more from the start of the NFL season to now here in week 2, other than Travis Etienne, who finished with a massive week last week. 140 rushing yards, had a 70-yard carry mixed in there, 3 catches as well, 18.6 PPR points, and the Jaguars decided we don't need Tank Bigsby anymore. They sent him off packing right to Philadelphia, and it is going to be Travis Etienne's backfield for the entire season, which is great to see for his production long term. Now he gets a Bengals defense that allowed 25 fantasy points to Cleveland's running backs last year. We all know how many dump downs that Dylan Sampson got last week against this defense. I think Travis Etienne is a really safe play, and I have him right outside of my top 12 running backs this week with a really good matchup. TreVeyon Henderson's the next guy, and yeah, TreVeyon Henderson didn't have the workload we expected in his debut, but the efficiency was there in terms of the ground game and also added 6 catches. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry. Him and Rhamondre split some time. Henderson should increase his snaps again this week. He's going to be a player that slowly sees the numbers start to uptick each week. He's the most talented playmaker on the Patriots offense, and Josh McDaniels is going to find ways to get the ball in his hands. This week, Patriots get the Dolphins, and I absolutely love that matchup where they allowed 156 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns to the Colts backfield last week. I think TreVeyon Henderson is a gotta have him in your lineup start, especially in PPR formats where you know he's going to get some receptions and his floor is a little bit safer. J.K. Dobbins is our final must-start running back of the week. He looked really sharp last week, 18 touches, 68 yards, and a touchdown while playing 53% of the snaps in the Broncos backfield. He's going to be their lead bell cow back to open the season. RJ Harvey is going to slowly eat into that. He had a really good carry in his limited action, but J.K. Dobbins to start the season is going to be a majority of the early down work. He didn't play much on third down. That was mostly Tyler Batty, but efficiency matches were strong with him. He forced a tackle on missed tackle on nearly 20% of his carries while averaging 2.63 yards after contact. Indianapolis allowed the highest yards after contact per attempt and the 6th highest rushing success rate in week 1. So I really like the fact that J.K. Dobbins can cash in on a pretty good matchup this week against the Colts. Running backs, I'm going to start with Isiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs. Week 1 was not great for Isiah Pacheco truthers, including myself. Kareem Hunt played a majority of the third down snaps, which was very unexpected. And rookie Rashard Smith got some playing time as well. So it's a 3-man committee in Kansas City. Pacheco played 51% of snaps and was wildly inefficient and didn't necessarily produce much on the ground. He only had 5 carries, so that's not going to do enough. If this team does not commit to the run game much, then Pacheco is going to be very risky to play in fantasy football. And on top of that, they're facing the Philadelphia Eagles, who allowed the second fewest points to running backs last season. Javonte Williams was effective in terms of fantasy football production. He scored 2 touchdowns, but he wasn't wildly efficient in that matchup. They get Jalen Carter back this week as well. It's going to be a really tough matchup for Pacheco here in week 2. The next player is Aaron Jones, and Aaron Jones' stock is right around where it should be, and Jordan Mason's taking over as that lead back on early down work for the Minnesota Vikings. It's truly going to be a 50-50 split throughout the season. Last week against the Bears, Jones had 11 touches compared to Jordan Mason's 16, and that's despite the fact that the Vikings were trailing for a majority of this game, and Aaron Jones is their primary third down back. So that's very interesting. Jones also saw 0 red zone carries last week. And the Falcons defense was top 10 in stuff rate and missed tackle percentages in week 1. It's a really tough matchup. And while the Atlanta Falcons have been susceptible to some running back receptions out of the backfield, I'm not necessarily putting all my stock into a timeshare against a pretty good run defense in the Atlanta Falcons. So I'm kind of fading Aaron Jones heading into week 2 here. The next player is Nick Chubb for the Houston Texans. I can't trust him once again in my lineup, partly because of the offensive line, but I mean, last week, 14 carries, 60 yards, played a majority of the early down snaps, 0 touches or usage on third downs as well. He's not explosive. He's not efficient anymore. He's behind a tough offensive line, and they play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who just held Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier to 22 carries for 48 yards. So Chubb is a one-dimensional guy that needs a plus matchup for the Houston Texans in terms of rushing for him to be a viable starter, and that's just not the case this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's get into the wide receivers on this list. Emeka Egbuka is the first name, and I had him as a must start last week. Week 2 doesn't change against a really tough Houston Texans defense. Last week, he finished with 23.6 fantasy points. He played 93% of snaps. He had a 44% slot snap usage with a 56% wide usage. So he's going to play all over the field for the Bucs, which is great news for when Chris Godwin eventually returns. He is going to be their wide receiver 2 outside of Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is only an outside receiver, so he's going to get a majority of those matchups over there. And last week, Houston Texans allowed the most receivers to the slot out of any other defense in the NFL last week. Kamari Lattister and Derek Stingley are outside guys. They should be able to avoid that matchup, and it's going to be great for Emeka Egbuka in the middle of the field as the Bucs look to beat the Houston Texans in potentially a low-scoring matchup there. Next must start is actually Travis Etienne's teammate. It is Travis Hunter. Hunter, yeah, sure, he finished with 6 catches, 33 yards. The box score doesn't really do him justice for how impressive his debut was. 76% route share. He finished with a 26% target share, 28% first read share, and there were some missed throws by Trevor Lawrence mixed in there that Hunter could have had a really big day. He is going to be a consistent option for this Jacksonville Jaguars passing game. Sure, he's going to mix in some defensive snaps. Don't worry about that. Travis Hunter is basically a full-time receiver for them. They get matched up against the Cincinnati defense. They gave up the 6th most fantasy points to slot receivers in week 1, and I absolutely think that he's a great play in PPR formats this week, right in that low-end wide receiver 2 range. And I think he does have some high upside in a potential shootout matching up with the Cincinnati Bengals. Our last player might be controversial as a must-start, but it is Ricky Pearsall. We know that Brock Purdy is for sure going to be missing this one. George Kittle is already on IR. Christian McCaffrey's healthy. Jauan Jennings might miss time, but it's Mac Jones time, baby. And that's all we need at quarterback for Ricky Pearsall to cash in. We saw last year with Brian Thomas Jr., he was really good in terms of Mac Jones finding ways to get him the ball. And now he has Kyle Shanahan to help scheme him up plays. I'm not worried about the quarterback change against this Saints defense. Last week, Ricky Pearsall, 20% target share, 54.3% air yard share, 3.28 yards per route run, 4 catches, 108 yards. And the Saints allowed the 9th most PPR points per target to perimeter wide receivers in week 1. Everything is telling me Ricky Pearsall is going to be just fine with Mac Jones as quarterback. The matchup's great. Kyle Shanahan's going to find a way to get the ball in his hands. I am not worried at all about Ricky Pearsall this week. And we know the Saints' main goal is going to be to shut down Christian McCaffrey. Could form a lot of one-on-one matchups on the outside, and I think Ricky Pearsall is going to take advantage of those. Wide receivers I'm sitting this week, Michael Pittman Jr. is the first one, and I'm really happy for MPJ. I think he is back full-time. He had 20 points against Miami last week, but this is just a different matchup. He is getting Pat Surtain, and he's going to get shadowed by him the entire week. We saw Surtain shadowed Calvin Ridley on over 80% of his snaps and absolutely blanketed him the entire game. So anytime you go against Pat Surtain and you're not an alpha type guy, you are just going to get an absolute sit candidate on my list. I think Michael Pittman Jr. rest of the season is going to be a good option, but this week, have him on your bench. He's in for a bust type of week. Jaylen Waddle is the next player that I'm avoiding this week, and it's more of a situation where I can't trust him at all in my starting lineups. I mean, it's just getting really bad. 16.7% target share last week, and he had a 1.3 ADOT. I mean, it's brutal what we're seeing out of the Dolphins. Waddle hasn't been a consistent fantasy option in 2 seasons now. Tyreek Hill is still going to dominate a majority of the targets and first read shares in this Miami Dolphins offense. And the fact he's got a lingering shoulder injury, and it's just simply too risky to put him in a lineup. He's topped 60 yards only twice in his last 15 games and just 6 touchdowns in his last 30 games. Jaylen Waddle is turning into the new Kyle Pitts, and I trust Kyle Pitts more than I do Jaylen Waddle at this point where both the two are. Cooper Kupp is our next must-sit candidate here. Same type of situation. Kupp kind of fell off towards the end of 2024, and I had him as a sit player last week. First week of 2025, nothing different. He had 15 yards on 3 targets despite playing 84% of snaps. His advanced numbers were much worse: 13% target share, 11% air yard share, and a 9.5% route win rate. At 32, he's cooked at this point, guys. The passing attack in Seattle is JSN or nothing. He had a 51% target share last week. I don't think Cooper Kupp is ever going to get going like he once did. And he's a player, if you are holding on to him, sell him high after one big week. I'm not even considering him on my benches at this point. Cooper Kupp is completely droppable in 12-team formats, regardless if it's PPR or standard. Next, the tight ends, and Juwan Johnson kicks off this list for the New Orleans Saints. Juwan Johnson has slowly been making noise with Spencer Rattler as his quarterback. Dating back to last season, Rattler has thrown him at least 7 targets in each of his last 3 starts. The usage last week was elite: 79.6% route share, 24% target share, and a 28% first read share, all while drawing 2 red zone looks in week 1. He led all tight ends in scoring in week 1, and I don't expect that to happen in week 2, but I think he's going to be in for a really good game against a tough matchup in the San Francisco 49ers. Don't fade him. I think he's one of the guys that I want to start, but he's got a tough matchup. I think I'm going with him over the likes of like a Jake Ferguson this week, just based on the volume alone and the tough matchup. David Njoku, do not bench him this week. He is still the tight end 1 for the Cleveland Browns, played the majority of snaps for the tight ends for them, almost all, 70% to be exact, of the 11 personnel snaps. And then Harold Fannin would come in for 12 personnel. He played nearly 80% of routes total. And last season against the Baltimore Ravens, Njoku finished with 5 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. The Ravens have struggled against tight ends in 2024, ranking 12th against the position. Last week, we saw Dalton Kincaid add 4 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown. I think David Njoku's in for a bounce-back week with all the hype on Harold Fannin. Njoku deserves more respect and should be in starting lineups this week. The next guy we have is Hunter Henry, Drake Maye's favorite target. Let's just say that. You could argue Kayshon Boutte as well, but I think that Hunter Henry is the guy there still. 4 catches, 66 yards, and he's just a dominating red zone guy as well. Hunter Henry's red zone target share has doubled that of any other Patriot since Drake Maye took over as a starter. So the Dolphins this week absolutely let Tyler Warren have his way with them. So I think that Hunter Henry is in for a big week in terms of production. Tight ends I'm sitting, I already mentioned this guy, and it's Dalton Kincaid. He, like I said, pretty solid week last week, but he had an 8.7% target share, and that was 5th in the Buffalo pecking order. He's just not breaking out. Dawson Knox even played more snaps than him. I just can't buy into Dalton Kincaid. It's, a tough matchup against the Jets as well. I just don't like Dalton Kincaid much. And if you're ranking 5th in targets for Buffalo, who's not throwing the ball a ton on a majority of basis when they're in a positive game script, I'm just fading him. Can't have him in the lineups. Next guy is Harold Fannin Jr. He only ran routes on 60% of dropbacks and posted an unsustainably high 31% target per route run last week. The snaps are not consistent enough for me to trust him. He's an exciting stack, and the Ravens are better than the Bengals in terms of covering tight ends. So I'm fading Harold Fannin this year. And then Colston Loveland. Cole Kmet played 91% of snaps. Loveland only played 56% last week. And the Detroit Lions defense has just allowed 4 touchdowns to the tight end position dating back to last season. So I think with Loveland, he's a stash on your bench. Same with Fannin. Hold these guys. Just don't start them this week. I think they're better long-term options. Let's get into the defenses you guys need to consider streaming this week. The Cardinals are the first team. They're playing the Panthers, where Bryce Young continues to struggle. Carolina had 3 turnovers last week, and I think it's going to be a great matchup for them for the second straight week. The Rams are the next team. They're absolutely going to pick on the Tennessee Titans, who their offensive line really struggled, and the Rams have an elite pass rush. It's just a perfect combination. Cam Ward was very inaccurate at times last week. The wide receivers struggled. Plus matchup for the Rams. And then the 49ers, despite, all the injuries in the offensive side of the ball, the defense is healthy and looking just as good as they did 2 years ago. So I think the 49ers against Spencer Rattler, who hasn't scored doubled over 13 fantasy points in 5 of his last 8 games, is a guy that you need to be starting a defense against. And then I'm sitting the Chiefs. They're playing the Eagles. Eagles are a brutal matchup for them, and the Chiefs didn't look too good in week 1. Jets, similar type of situation, a lot of talent on that side of the ball, but really tough matchup for them going up against the Buffalo Bills. Kickers I'm going with are Cameron Dicker and Chad Bryland, both plus matchups heading into this week that they should deliver. And then I'm sitting Younghoe Koo, has really struggled as of late. They brought in kicker competition, fade him, and then Harrison Butker. Eagles are very good against kickers. Ultimately, though, guys, this is the end of our start and sit advice video. If you want to tune into our live stream Sunday from 10:30 Eastern time until we answer all the questions, drop all the questions in there. If not, drop them in the comments down below. And I will catch you guys next time here on Blitz Fantasy Football.